The council chamber on orbital station Verith Prime was built to make you feel small. The ceiling climbed 40 meters above the floor, the walls were cut from black stone quarried out of a dead moon 4,000 years ago, and the 31 delegate seats curved in a wide circle around a central platform that glowed from underneath like something people were supposed to pray toward. The humans called it a fishbowl. Ambassador Junio had been inside it 11 times over 6 years, and every single time the building tried to shrink him, and every single time it failed. Not because he was impressive to look at, because he was not. He was a thin man in a plain dark jacket who carried nothing more threatening than a data tablet, but because Junio had long ago decided that rooms did not get to decide how a person felt inside them. He sat alone in the human delegation box. He had sent his staff home 2 days ago. The charges against Earth had been entered into the record that morning, and they were long. 14 counts of unauthorized military expansion beyond assigned territorial limits, a full refusal to submit biotech research for compact review, cultural contamination of 3 pre-contact civilizations who had been reached by human traders before the compact's own contact teams could get there, unilateral modification of 2 navigational jump corridors without council approval, and a final entry that read simply destabilizing presence, which had 19 co-signatories attached to it and no definition anywhere in the document. Junio had read all of it the night before. He had slept fine afterward. The speaker of the Galactic Compact was a Verith elder named Orith, 400 years old, robes that were older than most human governments, a voice that carried the particular heaviness of someone who had presided over 17 diplomatic crises and expected this to be the 18th, and Orith read the final count into the chamber record without ceremony. 27 votes in favor of ejection. 4 against. Earth was removed from the Galactic Compact, effective immediately, with a 72-hour grace period for logistical withdrawal. The chamber made the sound that large groups make when they believe they have finished something. A low, collective exhale, the sound of crossed arms, the sound of a decision landing. Orith looked at the human delegation box. Every ejection in compact history had produced the same sequence of events at this moment: the protest, the appeal, the demand for reconsideration, and in one case from a civilization that no longer existed, actual tears. Junio stood up. He straightened his jacket, which did not need straightening. He did it the way a man does something with his hands when he wants the room to wait for him, without asking it to wait. He said, "Noted. We will need 72 hours to complete our withdrawal procedures." He sat back down. The chamber went quiet in a way that the ventilation system suddenly became the loudest thing in the room, and 3 delegates leaned toward each other across their seats and spoke in low frequencies that the human monitoring equipment picked up anyway, and what they were saying, in 3 different languages, was a version of the same thing. Why is he not arguing? Junio did not answer a question no one had asked out loud. 40 minutes away by relay signal, in a monitoring station that orbited Earth's second Lagrange point, junior analyst Myri sat in front of a screen that was showing her the same vote count the rest of the galaxy was watching. She was 19 years old. She had been awake for 30 hours. She pulled up a file that her director, Hain, had locked 14 months ago. A file with a cover page that said only, "Protocol Severance, execute upon vote confirmation." The file was not complicated. It was a sequence of authorization commands, each one connected to a different system in a different part of the compact's infrastructure, each one designed to do a specific and quiet thing at the right moment. Myri placed her thumb on the reader. The reader beeped once. Protocol Severance began running in the background of 43 separate systems across compact space, and none of those systems made any noise about it, and no alerts went out, because the protocol was not a hack or a weapon or an attack. It was simply the expiration of a contract, the way a light turns off when you stop paying the electricity bill, and the darkness does not announce itself, it is just suddenly there. Myri sat back in her chair. Her hands were in her lap. She held the shaking below her sternum where the cameras on the wall could not see it. Back in the chamber, Orith was closing the session with the formal language that compact law required. The ejection was legal, the process had been correct, the record would reflect the vote without objection from the human delegation. A delegate from the Preth Collective, one of the 4 who had voted against ejection, caught Junio's eye across the chamber floor and held it for a moment. Junio gave a small nod. The kind of nod that means, "Yes, you understood what just happened." The kind of nod that means, "The others will understand soon enough." The 72-hour clock began. Across compact space, in corridor relay stations and medical arrays and navigational hubs and early warning sensor webs, 43 quiet processes ran in the background and did nothing dramatic and made no sound, and the galaxy went about its evening as if the most useful species in it had not just been handed the door and taken it. The compact celebrated. Earth packed. And somewhere in the navigation computers of the Yeth corridor, the busiest jump lane in the sector, the one humanity had modified without asking 4 years ago because the original routing was 11% less efficient and 11% had been driving Hain absolutely crazy. A small algorithm that no one in the compact had ever thought to document sat in its place and waited, the way a keystone waits, holding the arch up with no interest in being noticed until the day someone decides to pull it out. The withdrawal was the cleanest thing humanity had ever done inside compact space, which should have been the first warning. Human personnel vacated every compact station on schedule. No arguments, no delays, no personal items left behind, no dramatic final speeches in corridors, and human ships filed their departure logs in correct format and correct sequence and correct timing. And human trade convoys rerouted themselves away from compact lanes with the kind of quiet efficiency that made the traffic controllers who watched it happen feel, for reasons they could not explain, deeply uneasy. It was too tidy. Humans were not tidy. The delegates who had voted for ejection had spent years documenting exactly how not tidy humans were, 14 incidents of unauthorized expansion and sanctioned construction, and reviewed research, unilateral decisions made in places where decisions were supposed to be collective. And here they were, leaving without breaking a single rule, and something about that felt worse than if they had broken all of them. 36 hours into the 72-hour window, the first incident report came in. It came from the Yeth Corridor relay station, and it was written in the flat, technical language that engineers use when they are trying to be calm about something that is not calm. The corridor's navigational drift correction system had begun producing readings that did not match the baseline that the compact's own computers expected to see, and the correction algorithms that were currently running were producing outputs that none of the compact's engineers could fully read because the architecture of those algorithms was proprietary, not filed in any compact system, not reviewed by any compact panel, because the humans had submitted the documentation for it 3 years ago and the review panel had returned it as non-priority. Non-priority. The Yeth corridor moved 40% of all commercial traffic in the sector. The engineers submitted an urgent internal request for the correction algorithms documentation and received, in response, an automated message from the human contractor firm that had built it. The message said that the firm had ceased operations as of the ejection date and that all proprietary materials had been archived under Earth government jurisdiction and that any inquiries should be directed to the office of the Earth Secretary General. 31 engineers stared at that message for a long time. The second report came 8 hours later, from 2 medical stations on the outer rim of compact space. The pharmaceutical synthesis arrays at both stations had entered standby mode. Not malfunction, standby, the kind of default state a system goes into when the maintenance contract that keeps it running has ended, which was exactly what had happened, because the arrays ran on a base code architecture that had been updated and standardized and quietly maintained for 40 years by a human contractor firm, and that firm, like the other one, had ceased operations at the moment Earth's ejection became official. The stations sent emergency requests to their supply chains. Their supply chains sent emergency requests to the compact's logistics division. The logistics division sent a request to the human government. The human government's automated response system acknowledged receipt and said that a representative would be in contact within 5 to 7 business days. Business days. People needed medication now. Director Hain was in her office on Earth's orbital command station when the third report came in, and she read it with the same expression she used for everything. Focused, still, giving nothing away, and then she set it on her desk and looked at the wall for a moment before calling Secretary General Siokchan. Siokchan arrived in her office 12 minutes later because he had learned, over 4 years of working with Hain, that when she called instead of sending a message, it was worth 12 minutes of walking. She showed him the third report. The compact's early warning sensor web, the network that scanned for dark body stellar objects, rogue mass events, anything large and fast and moving in ways that could kill a planet, had a gap in its coverage grid, 7% of the sector uncovered, and the gap corresponded exactly to the positions of sensor relays that Earth had installed in year 22 of its compact membership. Relays that Earth had placed there without asking. Relays that covered positions the compact's original grid had missed. The compact had known about the gap. 3 separate funding requests had been submitted over 15 years to fill it with compact-built relays, and all 3 requests had been denied because sensor grid expansion was not a priority. Allocation. Earth had fixed it anyway, alone, without approval, because one of Daewon's navigators had flagged the gap in a routine patrol report and Hain had looked at it and said, that needs to be covered, and so they covered it, and nobody in the compact had ever asked how the gap got filled because the gap was filled and that was the end of it. Until it wasn't. Seokjin looked at the report for a long time. He asked Hain how many of the 27 voting delegates had contacted them. 14, she said. In the first 12 hours, all unofficial channels. He asked what they said. They asked if we needed help with the withdrawal. They were trying to determine if we knew what was happening. He looked at her. They know that we know now, she said. Admiral Day 1 received his authorization from Seokjin at R44, and he issued a single fleet-wide order that was so calm and so correct and so completely within the legal rights of a non-member state that the Compact's military observers who monitored the transmission had to read it 4 times before they understood what they were looking at. The order was, assume standard patrol formation, all corridors. No weapons raised.
No egressi pasture.
No communications sent to any Compact vessel or station. 83 human ships, survey vessels, mid-range destroyers, 2 carrier-class ships that the Compact had filed. 17 complaints about over the years for being too large for their assigned patrol zones, moved to positions at every significant jump corridor in the sector. They did not block anything. They were simply there. The way a hand rests on a door handle without turning it. The Compact's traffic authority sent a formal query asking for the fleet's stated purpose. Daywin's communications officer sent back a response that said, standard patrol formation, non-member state, no Compact authorization required. Which was true. Which was the part that made it so much worse than a threat would have been. A threat you could respond to. A threat had a shape. A threat told you where the line was. But this was not a threat. This was 83 ships doing something completely legal in positions that happened to be everywhere. And there was no rule to invoke against it because the humans had read the rules and the rules did not cover this. The Compact Council was recalled for an emergency session. The Speaker's office sent out the recall notice and then the Speaker's aide, a young Verith named Soto who had worked in Compact administration for 60 years, looked at the blank agenda field on the session template and sat there for a while because he did not know what to write in it. He had never not known what to write in it. He left it blank. He figured the Speaker could fill it in when he arrived. He figured by then they would know what this was. He was not sure that was true. At the 71st hour, 1 hour before the withdrawal deadline ended and Earth's official separation from the Galactic Compact became permanent, a transmission went out from Earth's orbital command station to every member civilization simultaneously. Not to the Council. To every civilization directly. All 31 of them at once, the same signal, the same timestamp, arriving in 31 different receiving stations at the same moment, which was itself a kind of message because the Compact's diplomatic protocol required all official communications to go through the Council's central relay first, and Earth was no longer a member of the Compact, so Earth was no longer required to use the central relay, and the first thing 31 civilizations learned about the document was that it had arrived in a way that told them the old rules did not apply anymore. The document was 11 pages long. It was titled, Terms of Continued Human Cooperation with Non-Member Civilizations. Xenolinguist Bora had written all 11 translations herself. She had been working on them for 4 months, alone, in a small office on the 4th floor of Earth's diplomatic building, with the door closed and 3 dictionaries open on her desk at all times, and she had chosen every word in every version with the kind of care that people who love language use when they know the language is going to do real work. The title alone had taken her 2 weeks. The word cooperation was doing most of the heavy lifting. In 3 of the 11 galactic languages it carried a meaning close to "we're choosing this," implying that the cooperation was a gift being offered, something that could be withdrawn, something that existed because humans had decided it should exist, and in 2 other languages the same word carried a different weight, something closer to "you are receiving this," implying that the cooperation was being given to someone who needed it, and Bora had not changed the word between versions because both meanings were true and she wanted every reader to feel whichever one applied to them. The first section of the document dealt with infrastructure. It stated that Earth would continue to maintain all critical systems it had built, the sensor relay network, the Yeth corridor navigation algorithms, the pharmaceutical synthesis array basecode, 40 separate installations across compact space, and that it would maintain them on a fee-for-service basis, billed monthly in standard trade units to each dependent station or corridor. The fees were listed in an appendix. They were fair. Not generous, fair, calculated to cover labor and materials and nothing more, which was somehow more frightening than if they had been outrageous, because an outrageous price was something you could negotiate or refuse, but a fair price was something you simply had to pay, and the fairness of it made clear that this was not revenge and not extortion. It was a business arrangement. It was an invoice, and the civilization on the other side of that invoice had decided to stop being angry about anything and simply be correct. The second section addressed the 3 pre-contact civilizations. It stated that those civilizations were now Earth's bilateral trade partners and that Earth would not interfere with the compact pursuing its own separate relationship with them, and that Earth also would not step back from the relationships it had already built, which was not a threat, just a fact. The way saying the river is there is not a threat, it is geography. The third section addressed the Yeth corridor specifically. It stated that any compact vessel operating in the corridor did so at its own navigational risk until the compact could independently certify a correction for the drift that had been accumulating since the human algorithm went into maintenance expired status, and that Earth offered to license the correction algorithm to the compact at a price that was listed in the appendix, and that Earth's own engineers estimated the time required for the compact to develop an independent correction was approximately 14 months. 14 months. The Yeth corridor moved 40% of the sector's commercial traffic. Bora was in Haynes' office when the first response came back, not an official response, an informal one, a signal from a delegate on one of the Outer Rim member worlds who had worked with Bora directly on 3 translation projects over the years, and the signal said, in a language that had 17 words for different kinds of silence, I read it twice and I still do not know what to call it. Bora sent back a single word in the same language. The word meant, correct. The document's 4th section offered renegotiated membership. It laid out the conditions, Earth's biotech research would never be subject to compact review panels again. Human first contact rights would be formally recognized in compact law. The 2 modified jump corridors would be classified as human infrastructure on indefinite lease to the compact, and a new joint committee structure would replace the old review system. These were not requests. The document was clear that they were not requests. And then there was the last line. Section 11. 1 sentence. It read, the foregoing terms are not a negotiation, they are a calibration. Earth has already determined what it will and will not do. This document describes that determination, and the compact's response will indicate whether the compact wishes to be included in it. Junior analyst Myri was alone in a monitoring room when she pulled up the transmitted document and read it through from the beginning, and when she reached section 11 she stopped and read it again. And then she read it one more time with her finger tracing the words on the screen because she wanted to make sure she was reading it the way it was written and not the way she hoped it was written. She was reading it right. She flagged the line for the historical record with a tag that said, significant, recommend preservation in primary archive. Then she leaned back in her chair and pressed her hands flat against her knees and looked at the ceiling and almost laughed. It came out as something else. Something that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sound people usually made in professional monitoring rooms, and she was glad she was alone. Speaker Orith received the document at the same time as everyone else. He read the title and set it down and asked his aide to pull Earth's complete membership file. Not the summary, not the incident report compilation, the full unabridged record, 61 years of everything. The file was large. His aide brought it in 3 physical volumes because Orith preferred reading things he could hold. Orith sat with the first volume for a long time. He read the incident reports, the 14 counts of unauthorized expansion, the unsanctioned construction, the unreviewed research, and he had read all of those before. Everyone had read those. Those were the things that had built the case. Then he kept reading. He read the maintenance logs and the infrastructure installation records and the navigational reports and the contractor agreements and the sensor relay placement justifications. And he read the 3 denied funding requests for sensor grid expansion that Earth had quietly resolved without comment, and he read the 7 documentation submissions that review panels had marked non-priority, and he read the medical array maintenance contracts that had been running for 40 years without a single failure reported. He sat with all of it for a long time. Then he said something to no one in the room, in his own language, quietly, a phrase that translated, roughly, as, we were reading the wrong column. His aide asked what he meant. Orith set the file down and looked at the transmission light on his desk, the one that showed 31 civilizations were currently sitting with the same 11 pages he was sitting with. We spent 6 years reading everything they did wrong, he said, and none of us ever asked what was still standing because of it. His aide did not have an answer for that. Neither did the 4,000 years of institutional authority that the chamber had been built to represent. The emergency session was called 14 days after the document went out, and this time the human delegation arrived full. Ambassador Junior walked in first, same plain jacket, same unhurried pace, and behind him came 6 staff members carrying real work materials, tablets, reference files, a portable translation unit that Bora had modified to include 4 new subdialects that the compact's own translation system had not yet catalogued, and they filled the human delegation box and set their things down and arranged themselves the way people arrange themselves when they plan to be somewhere for a while. Several delegates noticed that the humans looked rested. This was also upsetting. The chamber had not managed to feel the same since the vote. The architecture still tried, the ceiling still climbed 40 meters above the floor, the black stone walls still carried the weight of 4,000 years, but something in the room's relationship to the humans sitting inside it had shifted, the way a room shifts when you realize the person you invited to sit down is the one who built the chair. The first part of the session was the accounting. Each affected civilization read its damage report into the record, and the reports were not angry, they were precise, the way engineers are precise when they are reading stress data after a beam has been removed from a structure. That was told the beam was decorative. The Yeth corridor, 11 commercial convoys delayed by an average of 32 hours each, one near collision between a cargo hauler and a survey vessel that had both received incorrect drift readings from the compromised navigation system. Total economic impact still being calculated, but preliminary estimates placed it in the range of significant. The medical arrays, synthesis backlog at 2 stations had grown to a 3-month wait for non-emergency pharmaceutical production, 3 cases of treatment delay reported, supply chain rerouting underway but slow because the rerouting options all ran through corridors that were less efficient than the Yeth. Which was compromised? Which was the problem? The sensor web, the 7% gap remained open, and 6 days ago a dark body mass event had passed through the uncovered zone, small, non-threatening, the kind of thing that happened regularly in deep space, but it had passed through undetected, and the only reason anyone knew about it afterward was that one of Earth's survey vessels had logged it on the way through and filed the report out of what appeared to be pure professional habit, because they were no longer a member of the compact and they had no obligation to file anything. Junio received that report on his tablet during the session and read it without expression and forwarded it to Seokjin with a note that said, "See item 7, Daewon's crew filed anyway." Seokjin wrote back, "Of course they did." A delegate from the Preth Collective spoke during the open comment period, and the Preth were one of the 4 who had voted against ejection, and this delegate was a tall, slow-moving being named Verith who had a reputation in diplomatic circles for asking questions that nobody wanted to answer in public. Verith stood at the comment lectern and said, "I want to ask the chamber a question. When did we begin treating human disruption as the same thing as human destruction? And I also want to ask who has benefited from keeping those 2 things confused, because I looked at the full membership file this week for the first time, and those are different things. They are very different things, and I think we owe ourselves an honest answer about why we never separated them." Verith sat down. Nobody answered. The question sat in the chamber the way a structural crack sits in a wall. You can look away from it, but you cannot make it stop being there. Hayne was called to the testimony platform as a technical expert rather than a diplomat, and she stood at the platform with no notes because she did not need notes for this. She had built every piece of it, and she walked the chamber through the 40 load-bearing nodes one by one, not to impress anyone, not to threaten anyone, in the same tone a plumber uses to explain to a homeowner how the pipes actually run behind the walls. Each node had a name and a location and an installation date and a maintenance record. None of the maintenance records had a single failure. The average operational age was 23 years. A delegate from the Heth Accord interrupted partway through to ask why none of the documentation for these systems existed in compact accessible records, and Hayne looked at the delegate with an expression that was not unkind and said, 7 of them were submitted for compact documentation review. They were returned as non-priority. We kept building. We submitted the rest 4 years ago in the infrastructure disclosure packet that the Council's review office acknowledged receiving and has not yet acted on. The delegate from the Heth Accord did not ask any more questions. Hayne kept going. When she reached node 40, the sensor relay network, she put a map on the chamber's main display that showed the coverage grid before human installation and after, and the before version had a gap in it like a missing tooth, and the after version was complete, and she let the chamber look at it for a moment without saying anything, because she had learned a long time ago that some things were better left to sit in silence than explained into smallness. She stepped down from the platform. She walked back to her seat. She did not look at anyone on her way. The second recess of the session was 20 minutes long, and Seokjin spent it on a private channel with Daewon, who was on the bridge of his flagship 2 sectors away, watching the junction of 3 navigational corridors from a position that was completely legal and completely understood by everyone. Daewon asked if it was working. Seokjin watched the chamber feed, watched Orith sitting with his hands folded and his eyes on the display where Hayne's map was still showing, the before and the after, the gap and the coverage. "We didn't do this to make a point," Seokjin said. Daewon waited. "We did it because it was true, the point. is just what happens when true things get ignored long enough. Day 1 was quiet for a moment. Do you think they understand that? He asked. Orith does, Seokjin said. The others are getting there. The formal vote on renegotiation came at the end of the session. 23 civilizations voted to enter renegotiation under the terms Earth had submitted. 4 abstained. 4 held out. The 4 who held out were not doing so because they disagreed. 2 of them had called Junio privately during the recess and told him exactly that. They were doing so because accepting the terms required acknowledging that the ejection had been a mistake and acknowledging that was going to cost them something. At home, politically, institutionally, in ways that took time to manage. Junio sent Hain the abstention count. She sent back a single number. 11 weeks. That was how long she had estimated it would take the holdouts to finish managing whatever they needed to manage. She had built that into the timeline. She had built everything into the timeline. Junio set his tablet down and looked at the chamber, at Orith, who was initialing the renegotiation request with the careful, unhurried signature of someone who had spent 400 years learning that the most important decisions were the ones you signed without drama, and he thought about the 2 days he had spent alone in this chamber, before the vote, sitting in the empty delegation box in the evenings after the formal sessions ended, watching the light from Verith Prime's star come through the high windows and move across the black stone walls. He had not been worried then either. He had just been waiting for the room to understand what it was actually holding. The 4 holdouts came back in 9 weeks, not 11, which meant Hain had been wrong by 2 weeks, which was the closest she ever came to being wrong about anything, and she noted it in her personal log with the kind of satisfaction that people feel when the world performs slightly better than expected. The new compact charter was signed 6 months after the vote. The signing ceremony was held aboard a human vessel. This had been Hain's condition, not negotiable, not open for discussion, one of 3 conditions she had attached to the ceremony logistics that she had submitted to the planning committee in a 3-line message that read, aboard a human vessel, crew present, no compact staging, confirm or propose alternative timeline. The compact planning committee had proposed an alternative timeline. Hain had not responded to it. The signing was held aboard a human vessel. The ship was not large. It was a survey-class vessel called the ESV Myri, which Day 1 had renamed 2 weeks before the ceremony in a move that he had not consulted anyone about, and that Myri herself found out about when the ship's registration update crossed her desk, and it was not a warship. It had no weapon systems above standard close-range defense. It was built for long-range travel and difficult terrain and finding things in places where things were not supposed to be found, which was what survey ships did, which was what humans did, which was why Hain had chosen this class of ship and no other. When the footage of the signing went out across the compact's broadcast network, every human watching it understood immediately why the room was that room and not another one. Most of them did not say anything about it out loud. They did not need to. The new charter contained everything from Earth's 11-page document. Infrastructure sovereignty, permanent, with lease rights to the compact at fair rates. First contact recognition, encoded in compact law, with 3 specific procedural protections that Bora had drafted and that the compact's legal team had initially pushed back on and then accepted when Bora sat across from them for 4 hours and explained, in their own language, in the particular formal register that their legal tradition used, why each protection was structurally necessary and not optional. Bilateral review for Earth's biotech research, chosen partners only, Earth selects them, no panel with automatic access, the old system gone completely. And a new position in compact governance that had not existed before and had no precedent in 4,000 years of institutional history. Infrastructure auditor. The mandate was simple. Find the load-bearing systems before they become crises, document them, protect them, make sure no one votes to throw away something they have not actually looked at first. The compact's nomination committee had submitted 4 names. Seokjin had submitted 1. His read, Myri, age 19, Office of Earth Strategic Contingency Bureau, recommend full clearance access to all compact systems, no restriction. The committee had come back with a question about her age and her experience level. Seokjin had sent back her file. The full one, including the timestamp on her protocol severance authorization, which showed that she had initiated a 43-system contingency protocol alone in a room at 19 years old, with correct authorization, 0 errors, 31 hours into a sleepless shift, and then gone back to monitoring. The committee stopped asking about her age. Myri accepted the position in a 1-sentence message that said, I will need full access to everything. They gave it to her. After the signing, When the formal part of the day was done and the delegates had moved to the ship's common area where Earth's catering crew had set out food from 7 different human regions because nobody had told them. To narrow it down, and so they had not, Junio found Bora standing at the observation window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the dark. She had a glass of something in her hand, and she was looking at the stars the way people look at things they have been working toward for a very long time. Junio stood next to her. He said, "How many times did they almost walk?" She thought about it, not performing the thinking, actually doing it, going back through 6 months of sessions in her head one by one. 11, she said. I counted. He asked which one was closest. She did not have to think about that one. Section 11, she said. 3 delegates wanted it removed from the final charter. Said it was insulting, said it implied the compact had no agency in the arrangement. He asked what she told them. That it was not written to insult them, she said. It was written so they would never have to be insulted again, because from then on they would know exactly where humanity stood. No guessing, no reading incident reports and drawing conclusions, no mistaking disruption for destruction, just a clear line that said here is what we do and here is what we do not do, and you can plan around that. She looked at her glass. 2 of them understood it that way, she said. 1 did not. He signed anyway because his trade margin on the Yeth corridor alone made everything else. Secondary. Junio looked at the stars. Was that enough? He asked. It was sufficient, she said, and there was a difference between those 2 things that neither of them needed to explain to the other. Secretary General Seokjin was in his office in Seoul when the final ratification signal came through. It was morning. The city was doing what Seoul did in the morning, which was move fast and loud and with total commitment, and he stood at his window with the signed charter on his desk behind him and watched the street below for a while. His communications terminal chimed. Deep range transmission, survey class, outer sector. He read the header and sat down. The transmission was from one of Earth's survey vessels that had been working the far edge of charted space for the past 8 months, a crew of 22, the kind of crew that went to the places that were not on maps yet and made maps, and the message was from the vessel's commander, a young woman named Bori who had been doing this kind of work for 6 years and who wrote her reports in the dry, efficient style that deep-range commanders used because satellite time was expensive. The message said, encountered uncontacted civilization, 3rd such contact this quarter, population approximately 12 million across 2 habitable landmasses, pre-industrial but with demonstrated aptitude for applied physics based on preliminary observation of their irrigation and structural systems, awaiting your guidance on contact protocol. Then there was a second paragraph. The second paragraph said, also, our crew made contact informally before the formal observation window closed. It happened during a resupply excursion and was not planned. One of our engineers traded solar panel assembly knowledge for a sample of a fermented grain product the locals make, which the crew has assessed as genuinely extraordinary. They are calling it the best thing they have found in 6 years of deep-range work. The local community seems very pleased with the trade. They have sent 3 more of their people to the excursion site and appear to be interested in discussing further exchange, awaiting guidance on how to proceed. Seokjin read it twice. He looked at the transmission for a long time. Then he closed it without sending a reply. The crew knew what to do. They had made the map and drawn the line and started building the thing before anyone told them to, the way humans always did, the way they had always done, the way they would keep doing in every direction space allowed, and somewhere out there a civilization of 12 million people who had never seen a sky with other ships in it was sitting around a sample of their best fermented grain with 22 strangers from a pale blue. And that was not a diplomatic incident. That was a Tuesday. That was just humanity, doing what it did, in the places no one had looked yet, leaving something standing wherever it went.